Ashamnu, I confess, I am guilty. On this Kol Nidre, after the terrible year that we have all experienced, that we are still going through, I feel discouraged and pessimistic. It is hard to see light at the end of this tunnel, to envision our community and our nation acting in ways that are civil, sensitive, thoughtful, equitable, and just. Finding a vaccine for COVID-19 will not remedy the ills that are a part of our country and that have been for many, many years. A lot of us are deeply frustrated with the status quo in America, and some of us are angry. We see it in the protests on the street, from Portland to Kenosha to Rochester. We see it on cable television every day and on social media every few seconds. It feels as if our country is on the brink, that centuries of systemic racism, of oppression, brutality, and economic inequality have finally caught up with the powers that be, and with a president who couldn't give a damn. How do we find hope in an environment like this? How do we find meaning, even redemption? There is a place for anger, Judaism teaches us, in the face of oppression and injustice. When ancient societies failed to care for their most vulnerable members, the biblical prophets stood up and expressed moral outrage, not only against their leaders, but against their friends and neighbors. The prophet Isaiah, on Yom Kippur, tells the Israelites that God doesn't want their meaningless fasts. What God desires most of all is for them to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. But there is a big difference between moral anger and hateful rage. When protests against societal injustice mutate into acts of looting, rioting, and the destruction of local businesses, that's no longer prophetic behavior. That's criminality. And it does nothing to further the cause it is supposedly trying to advance. All that the violence and mayhem actually helps is the system that wants to shut down protest and the leader who calls for law and order rather than healing and institutional transformation. It is hard to feel hopeful at a time like this. But our religion teaches us that hope isn't optional. Hope is a mitzvah. Over and over again, Judaism offers us a vision of peace and justice, a world of harmony and equality, a place of promise. In the book of Genesis, the Torah describes the Garden of Eden, a place of serenity where all creation, Adam, Eve, wildlife, ecosystems, exist in a state of dignity with one another, untroubled by violence, exploitation, or even death. This depiction of Eden is echoed later in the Bible in a vision from Isaiah, who I noted earlier. In messianic time, says the prophet, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard lie down with the kid. He says elsewhere that people shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. These hopeful, harmonious, and beautiful visions, one of the past, one of the future, may seem more romantic than realistic to most of us who live during a time like our own. Trying to imagine a world that is just and peaceful, when people are at each other's throats over politics, race, and culture, when climate change is burning our wildlands and melting our glaciers, probably comes across as far-fetched and fanciful. But these visions are the heart and soul of Judaism. They are aspirational, a messianic dream, a mission, and a mitzvah for us as Jews. Our task is to try to recreate the world as it ought to be, not settle for the world as it is. This has been the Jewish mandate for millennia, the holy work our people are charged with, and it is more important now than ever before. The days of awe call Jews to personal tshuva, to repentance and return. Today, we also need a national call for tshuva, a collective return to mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and sanity. As the rabbis say in Pirkei Avot, the day is short and the task is great. How do we learn from and move beyond these angry protests and occasional eruptions of criminality and act again toward one another with civility? How do we engage in respectful conversation rather than hateful diatribes? How do we unite over shared values instead of dividing ourselves over polarizing politics and demographic tribalism? As we begin this new Jewish year, our task is clear. We must acknowledge, confess, and call out the ills that afflict our country before we can try to remedy them. There can be no peace without justice. We must confront thoughtfully and compassionately the systemic racism, economic inequalities, and abuses against our planet that have plagued our world for many, many years, and in some cases, for centuries. As I said at the outset, on this Kol Nidre, I feel discouraged and pessimistic. I'm entitled to my feelings, but I can't allow them to control me. As a Jew, I am commanded to have hope, to believe in and envision a better world, a world that is harmonious, just, and whole, and then to dedicate my life to making it a reality. Hope is a journey, and it can also be a struggle. Like the days of awe themselves, hope requires that we look within, that we assess where we are compared to where we ultimately want to be. It is not easy to change, and it is certainly not easy to change society. But hope, once we embrace it, will give us the vision, the strength, and the fortitude to save us from despair, give our lives meaning and purpose, and begin the process of fixing our very broken world. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will.